Hey, it's Jordan. I'm live here in Dallas, and we are with Dallas City Councilman Philip Kingston. I wanted to talk to you because obviously we're now over a month since 26-year-old Botham John was shot and killed. He was just in his apartment, and a police officer, a female white police officer, went to his apartment, intruded in on his apartment, and shot him. There's been multiple changing stories as far as what happened, and frankly, a lack of transparency from the Dallas PD. You've been in the city council for 5 years, and you know, the first thing that's striking to me, and I wanted to know from you, they issued their first, seems like almost one of their first steps was to issue a search warrant on Botham's apartment. Correct. Rather than where she lives, or really they were looking into him before the white police officer that shot him. What are your thoughts on the initial steps?
Well, I think that's certainly how the community has seen it, is that there was no attempt to secure things like her cell phone, which they already knew was going to be important because the 911 call came from there. And there is some chatter, hard to verify, that she may have had previous confrontations with this guy. And so that was something they should have, that she should not have been released in her own recognizance with her cell phone. The first thing she did is she went home and tried to scrub her social media, you know, and that's not okay. That's, you know, we're entitled to know what kind of person she is based on what she's published about herself. Right. That seems entirely reasonable, and for her to be given this special treatment strikes people in the community as not something they would be entitled to if the shoe were on the other foot.
Right. And he was killed on September 6th. I believe within days there was 2 different warrants. There was a search warrant of his apartment, and then 2 or 3 days later an arrest affidavit. And you were saying before we went on camera, she's the only living witness, and there were 2 different stories in a span of days. The original story that Amber Geiger, who's the police officer, was that, you know, she lives right under Botham, so directly, Botham lived on the 4th floor, she lived on the 3rd floor directly under him. She says she went to the wrong floor, where, you know, in the parking garage, she went to the wrong floor, and then assumed she was going to her apartment. And in that first search warrant, the story was she was trying to open the door with an electronic key card, and then Botham opened it, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. That version of the story is not clear at all. Mm-hmm. It is backed up, though, a bit by corroborating witnesses that Lee Merritt says he has, that say that she was banging on the door and yelling. And so it's possible that Mr. Jean saw a police officer through his peephole and opened the door. Right. Her story that is in the other version, which is in the search warrant affidavit, I believe, one or the other version, says that she found the door ajar. And the residents in this building have posted videos demonstrating quite clearly that the doors do not remain ajar. They're like hotel doors. So she did not find that door ajar, most likely. Anyway, the point you're trying to make is that within 72 hours of this killing, the only witness has at least 2 different versions of the story. That's extremely troubling.
Right. And also, in a normal circumstance, I mean, if it was not a police officer, certainly if it was a black person, if you went and shot somebody dead in his apartment, you wouldn't be let out within an hour on bond. What was the rationale to let this person off, other than she's a police officer and getting special treatment?
Well, you have a couple of instances of special treatment. So in the initial, probably confusing circumstances at the scene, whoever was in charge, apparently in consultation with Faith Johnson, our DA, made the determination that this should be treated as an officer-involved shooting as though she were on duty. And we do treat officers differently when they're on duty and use deadly force, and that's not unfair. That should be that way. But this clearly wasn't an officer-involved shooting, and by 7 the next morning, the police department, apparently at the top levels of command, had decided to treat it as a crime. But then there became, within the department, this debate about whether it's murder or manslaughter. And under Texas law, it's murder. Intentional killing is homicide. The Officer Geiger may be entitled to present defenses that related to reasonable mistake of fact. I have a legal theory about whether those will be successful. But these are steps in a process. First, it's murder, then you arrest, then you send to the grand jury. And if she can bond out, then she bonds out in the regular course of the normal operation of our criminal justice system, which would have been at Lou Sterrett Jail over here in Dallas. She would have had an open public bond hearing to set that bond. Instead, what happened was there was an agreed bond, basically. The Rangers, along with the Dallas Police Association, took her down to Kaufman County where there would be no media. And where processing, as you pointed out, would likely be faster. And she was out on bond in less than an hour. Right. And then they were able to keep the Kaufman County authorities from even keeping a copy of the arrest warrant. So the media was further stymied in its ability to get the arrest warrant until the judge came back to her courtroom and could distribute it as a normal open record.
Right. And also what the audience should know is, she's the Dallas police officer, but the Dallas Police Department basically, gave the case to the Texas Rangers, citing that, we want an independent, we don't want to investigate ourselves. But from what I know, so the Texas Rangers, they decided it was manslaughter and not murder, but for the public, we don't have any information to back that up. They have not released the 911 call she made, so we cannot hear in her voice or really know what was she thinking, what was she saying. They have not released her police records. She was involved in a shooting in 2017 where she shot somebody claiming that he took her taser. We don't know the details around that. As far as I know, her body cam was not on. We also don't have information on the specific day that she shot Botham. How many hours did she work? When did she clock in? When did she clock out? So basically, the Texas Rangers decided on manslaughter, but we don't know their rationale, and the public is left to think this is the makings of a cover-up.
Well, and what the public ought to know is that the Rangers are famous for obscurity, for lack of transparency. They never respond to media inquiries. They never release investigative materials before they're released through the grand jury process. And yet, as you know, grand juries are secret, so generally you don't even get that until the case is being put on. So you have to understand the context to understand how frustrating it was to hear what was coming out of DPD command on the Saturday after this young man was killed. They kept saying over and over again, transparency, 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 and then they handed it to literally the least transparent agency that was available to them. And there's a contrast here because the Dallas County District Attorney's Office just finished securing a murder conviction for a police officer in a neighboring jurisdiction, Balch Springs, in Dallas County. And they were able to get that conviction after an investigation by the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, which is what Balch Springs did. Instead of giving it to the Rangers, they gave it to our local Sheriff's Department, who did a fine job with the investigation, and they had no problem securing a conviction or with being accused of lack of transparency for not responding to media requests.